Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event, Finding Your Way. Next Stop Assessment for Learning is a series of 5 webinars. So we continue our journey with Finding Your Way. Please remember to register for the next webinar on Thursday this week. Today's session, Finding Your Way, will be about multi-level and level-based exams and what to consider when looking for the best option. My name is Rafael Carpanês, and I am Business Development and Marketing Manager for Michigan Language Assessment in Brazil. Presenting this session, we have Rosalia Valero and Johnny Frank. Rosalia Valero is Strategic Development Head Americas at Cambridge Assessment English. She manages education transformation activity in Americas, working with ministries of education and educational institutions and organizations. Rosalia's expertise lies in English language teaching and training, professional development, and English language teaching management. Jonathan Frank has worked in English language teaching and education for more than 10 years in a variety of areas: teaching, materials writing, assessment, marketing, and recognition. Now, as Senior Business Development and Marketing Manager for Michigan Language Assessment, he enjoys working with American English exams in Mexico and the wider region. So let's get started. Please welcome our presenters today, Rosalia and Johnny. The virtual floor is yours, guys.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rafa, for that great introduction.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, internet can be temperamental. Rafael knows that from a meeting earlier on. I know there's been some heavy rain in Sao Paulo today. So yes, I'm really happy to be here, Rosalia. Talking about testing and assessments. It's one of my vices, but I love it.
I know, it's a favorite topic, of course. And looking at all the great colleagues here, people from Ecuador, people from Greece, Honduras, Mexico, Peru, wow, Argentina, Brazil. Thank you very much for being here. Oh, Panama, right. Costa Rica, lots of different places. So nice to have you here. So welcome. And we should start. Just a reminder again, if you would like to ask a question, would you please use the Q&A section that you can find below the slides so that they can be asked. We'll have some time, some minutes to, after we finish the presentation. So please try and direct your questions there. Okay, shall we start, Johnny? This is webinar 3
of 5.
Yeah, very exciting.
So in terms of a journey, we're almost halfway there. In about 20 minutes, we'll be halfway there, won't we?
Yeah, totally. Very,
so
very exciting.
We've introduced, and it is today. This is a quite. I think this is an interesting subject, and we enjoyed kind of planning this webinar on this presentation. Finding your way, as Rafael said, was in the introduction, as you'll have seen in the invite, is looking at multi-level and level-based tests. Yeah.
Yeah. Where are we going?
Those are exactly. So I forgot I'd put the map on here. So here we are.
Oh yeah, no.
So we are here.
We are here. Definitely. If it's October the 20th, that's where we are, trying to find our way, and we hope we will make it a bit easier, right? Less challenging, should we say?
I always like. I'm copying off you, Rosalia. We like to challenge people. And we've got a question.
Challenging you. Yeah.
So we have a question to start things off with. So thanks for those. Yeah, I'm gonna seamlessly transition in a second to Mentimeter, which is one of our favorite tools. And whilst I'm doing that nifty maneuvering backstage, Rosalia is going to introduce this question.
Exactly. So as we said, this is webinar 3 in our series of 5 different webinars, assessment for learning, next steps. So today we're going to focus on summative assessment. So we have a question for you. don't worry if you're not sure, but you're going to see, we're going to get, as Johnny said, seamlessly. This is going to happen so naturally. It will be, okay, things are happening now. So we have a question. What kind of tests is normally used in your context? So we're talking about your own personal experience with your school, your university, your language center, etc. Do we use a level-based exam, like, for example, A2 key for schools? Do you use a multi-level exam?
What we want to do is actually, in fact, we should be able to, if people go to menti.com, we need to get them on the website first, possibly using their cell phones. Just put the code in at the top of the screen, which you can see is 60 76 66 1. So that's at the top of the screen. If you can go to Menti and go there, you should be able to see the options, and we'd like to hear from you to see what your options are. We know that some of you put it in the chat, but we're interested to see what it looks like in terms of a whole set of answers. So don't be shy. Go there, and there we go. You should be able to join the quiz.
Right. So you're checking Menti, so things are happening there.
Exactly. So if you log in, you can, oh, I've given you 20 seconds for this one. So for those that you were there, you should be able to select. I think we've had a Menti update here. Rosalia, I think what we'll do is we'll go to the chat. If you could just tell me what their responses were from what you saw in the chat, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
Okay, yeah. I think we'll have to go to presentation mode here when we come back. So let me see if I can get the chat. Oh, lots of different things. Lots of ones. So that is level based. We do have twos. We have threes, which is interesting, a combination.
Yeah.
I don't think we are getting lots of fours, which is interesting, right? So this is people who really enjoy talking about assessment. Some of our favorite people, Johnny, actually, right? So we keep on getting, yes, 1, 2, and 3. Predominantly, I think 1 and 2.
Excellent. Well, they're in the right place, even if they weren't in the right place for Menti, because I think there's been some update that might have caught me out there. So my apologies for that. Before we kick off the next, how many minutes? 45 minutes or so. Let's just have a little recap on what has preceded this webinar. So
right.
Yeah,
let's go to presentation mode so that we can show them.
You should be in
slide.
Are you not in presentation mode? It should be showing presentation
You're
mode.
not.
Oh, you're quite right. I still had my screen paused. So now you should be able to see the slide I'm referring to, which is a recap of the journey so far.
Exactly.
Good save, Rosalia. I could have been presenting for the next 30 minutes and been on the same screen.
That's what partners are for. So we are recapping here. If you were here with us for webinars 1 and 2, these are some of the things we saw when we had the first webinar with Pablo Toledo and Johnny himself, right? That webinar was about principles of assessment for learning. We also had them talk about some of the key concepts and framework for assessment. And then there was a very interesting part where mainly Pablo talked about feedback, right? And then webinar 2, we had Alberto Costa, and we had our wonderful host here today, Rafael, and they talk about formative and summative assessment and the spectrum that you can find there. And they also talk about functions of assessment and some techniques and instruments that are generally used in assessment, right? So very quickly, don't worry if you were not here last week for these 2 webinars, you can see them, right? And some of our colleagues will be reposting those links so that you can go and watch them.
Thank you. What an incredibly concise recap that was, Rosalia. So yeah,
Thank
please
you.
check out those previous webinars if you want to just top up or find out some of those techniques and topics we spoke of. We will be referencing some of them today, but in a very kind of understandable way, even if this is your first webinar of the series that you're attending. So we've got that pondering look again. Now, don't worry, that doesn't mean we're going to Menti, because that's behind us. But this teacher, this hypothetical teacher, is wondering, summative assessment, how do I choose the most suitable test, Rosalia?
And this is how we started thinking about these months ago, right, Johnny? When we said, when people are asked this, right, why did you choose, or what are you choosing, what are you using, etc., etc. And we said, many people simply answer, well, it depends, right?
So
And
you're not giving me an answer.
What we're saying today is that there should be something after that.
Yeah.
Well, it depends. That's the beginning of the answer, we think, right, Johnny? So we should be thinking about what comes after, well, it depends. La 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 la, A B C D, etc., etc. Right?
It's easy to say. It's easy to say it depends, isn't it? But putting the detail behind it is a whole different story.
Very quick, gives you an answer, etc. But is it really an answer, right? There are different circumstances, and that's what we would like to explore with you today. So
we say but how, but what we actually mean is a whole range of different questions we need to use to interrogate what we're doing with assessment and the decisions we're making.
Yeah, sometimes we sort of tend to talk about the WH questions, but then we also have the how, of course. So who, when, where, and here we're talking about your educational context, right? Who, of course, we're talking about learners, right? But you want to know, for example, their age, how long they've been studying English, etc. So when does this come right at the beginning? That's not usual, but if it's somebody, for example, we're talking about different contexts, because the where is, where were these learners before they came to your classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So also the question is, how are you going to do these? How are you going to test them? And first of all, why are you testing them, right? People in general, Johnny, don't like tests. We have to be honest, right? Many people actually say they get very nervous when they have to take a test, right? And what am I expecting to get out of this? What messages do we want to communicate once we've had the test? Very important questions.
So to set the context, we think these are a great range of questions that you really need to know the answers to, or at least be very close to answering them beforehand. We had some people in the chat, Rosalia, saying it depends on learning styles. It depends on who's, that's totally true, the profile of your learners. When is important as well. I think why, we both kind of coincide that we think that's the biggie for us. With summative assessment, which is the crux of today, it tends to be to do with institutional and external stakeholder needs in terms of parents and potential parents and students coming to a school. And so with summative, there's an important when as well. And we spoke about this quite a lot in the first webinar, Pablo and I. We were saying that, okay, it might come at the end of a learning cycle, but it doesn't stop there as well. And we're going to look into some of the feedback mechanisms that these assessments can give you. So that it isn't just kind of like, ooh, we stop suddenly and that's it. But yes, this is a great starting point to say context, context, context. We need to know answers to all of these questions.
And whereas Alberto and Rafa were talking about summative assessment and diagnostic tests, last time we had a webinar here with all these wonderful colleagues, this time we're going to be really looking at summative assessment, right? And we're going to be looking at two different options, a level-based exam or a multi-level exam. And I think it's fair to say, Johnny, from the very beginning, that this is not which is better, right? And we don't intend people to choose. This is not going to be, okay, now you vote. Is a level-based test better or is a multi-level exam better, right? We're going to say, let's look about all those questions we've just asked and see what things we have to take into account, right? Because it's an important decision.
It is, and it's about context. It's not a contest between these two exam types.
Don't worry, you won't have to choose. what we will do is hopefully give you some interesting food for thought that must
Yeah.
be taken into account.
And speaking of food, not just because it's around lunchtime or it just has been, this isn't an exact recipe that you would follow to the letter. These are going to give you the fundamental and the framework behind your decisions when you're looking at the exams. And at the end, we're going to have some hypothetical case studies that Rosalie and I have worked on to show the kind of processes and the kind of thoughts that you might have when you're choosing certain exams for certain contexts, and why in certain contexts they might be appropriate, but they're just going to be hypothetical.
Right. So if you are here thinking, of course, Rosalia is Cambridge and Johnny is Michigan, which is actually just one big Cambridge organization, right? Assessment organization. We're not going to compare. We're actually going to talk about the different things that both Cambridge and Michigan language-based or multi-level exams have in common. So what do we say here, Johnny?
So, although this is a webinar that's set up to look at differences, and we will explore them, we thought we'd widen the scope a little bit because we're cheeky like that, Rosalia and I. And we thought, why not look at the similarities to begin with? I mean, often in learning, there's the notion of given information to new. So you use what you already suspect or know, in fact, learners have knowledge of, and then you use that as a platform for going onto something new. And I think it's a nice way of introducing this. We're going to call it loosely kind of dichotomy between multi-level and level-based, but as we're saying, that forget about that and think of it as context and plugging in the right summative assessment for yours. Exactly. So here we're saying that you've got 4 key areas that both level-based and multi-level, particularly, with specific reference to the Cambridge and Michigan portfolio, offer you. So there's a consistent measure there. There's clear reliability. And from those that are working with prep centers that are with us today, our colleagues, you'll know that year after year, there is a dependable and a predictable nature of results, which reflect how your teaching and your formative assessment use throughout the term has indicated. They give you clear directions of travel in different ways, but they certainly do. So it could be that you're taking key A2 and then B1 preliminary, or a school might have taken MET Go, and when they're younger teens, they might be getting A1, maybe A2. And then by the time they're finishing that cycle, they get something like a B1 a couple of years later on MET Go. So you can measure progress, and the progress is clear to students as well in the way that results are presented.
Exactly. And I think we've just mentioned, I mean, many people find assessment a bit intimidating or a bit scary sometimes. So we try and make it as motivating as possible, because assessment should be part of learning. That's why we talk about assessment for learning, right? Mm-hmm. This is not assessment of learning. It should really be assessment for learning. So, and I think we're going to touch on what we do, for example, when it comes to young learners. And we try and make them as motivating as possible. So the experience should be a positive one, right? And of course, we heard about feedback from the very first webinar, right? This is so important, Johnny, because we don't want people to get the results and only look, it's pass, okay, oh, fail, okay, it was an A, okay, enough, not enough, etc., right? Because that wouldn't really be enough, and we don't do that.
No, and also we're trying to dispel this notion that, okay, we're moving on to summative assessment now, all we needed is a score. No, we need a little bit more than that. And we're going to show you how summative, we spoke about using assessments in summative and formative contexts earlier in the series, and that's what the kind of path we'll be going down a little bit today.
Exactly. So what happens is, maybe at the beginning of a school year or at the beginning of a certain English course, etc., we tend to think we know where we are, right? And usually we know where we want to go, but there may come a time, and I think what has been happening here in Latin America, certainly for the last few months, starting, what was that, like mid-March or late February, right? Things started changing, right? Suddenly our educational context became really different. Things that hadn't happened before were happening. teachers had to, you've heard us say before, you are all heroes. The way that teachers have reacted, educators have been making it possible for education to continue. That is absolutely amazing. But it also shows you that maybe what you used to do before, you cannot do it any longer because there are special circumstances. The context has changed. Your learners have, you're not really seeing your learners face to face, etc. Lots of different things. We are relying more and more on technology, etc., etc. So there can be different directions, right? So we need to decide where we want to go and what the best way of getting there is, right?
Yeah, and some of the kind of you might have added different stops in the learning journey now just because of the turbulent year that 2020 has been.
Absolutely.
And that's not any kind of failure or disappointment. It's actually quite the opposite. It's reacting to the learning process and the external factors that can really impact it. So assessments are not different, and nor are summative assessments. You might have to change your direction of travel for a year or two, but you know, as long as you're doing this with the right questions in mind and the correct framework, then you know the outcome should be good and you'll get to where you're aiming to go or where you want your students to get to.
A principled decision. I think that that's a key message that we want to convey here. It should be a principled decision, right? So when it comes to our learning objectives, right, how can we make sure that they connect? First of all, I think we all agree that objectives should be clear, right? You should know where you're expected to get and how you should be getting there. And how about milestones, Johnny? Why are those important?
Well, at an institution, you might have certain, maybe finishing primary, you want students to be at an A2 level or B1, depending on the context of the school. And so summative assessments will really give that external validation to the teaching you're doing and the learning that's taking place. So it's important really to reflect on what you've got planned with your curriculum and how that can interlock or can combine with a summative assessment and complement each other. So really, you know, any kind of learning curriculum or cycle should have those key can-do statements or variations of taken from the Common European Framework. And so it should be quite easy, particularly with Michigan and Cambridge exams, to kind of put those together.
Exactly. And defined areas, because when we are teaching, I mean, there is a syllabus that we are following. Our chosen coursebook, for example, has a definite syllabus that we're following, and that should be interacting with what we expect to get by the end of, as I said, that term, that school year, etc. Right? So there is definition there. It's not like, well, let's see where we get, right? It's not one of those sort of impromptu decisions that you can probably make with your husband, with your family, etc. Right? Like let's start driving and see where we get. Shouldn't be like that in the classroom.
No, and I like you saying it needs definition. I totally agree, and I think that's a lovely way of putting it. Going back to one of the WH questions, when. So when and also a bit of the why. We're not just saying that you should arbitrarily insert summative assessments. They need to be part of a whole holistic circle of assessment. And so we don't want one of two things. One of what Rosalie was saying was, oh, let's just see how it goes. And then they take the exam and maybe they'll do okay.
Oops, it was too difficult, or no, it was too easy, right?
We didn't know there was a list, yeah. Nor do we want schools to be focusing just on the exam, because it would have a negative impact if you're just exam prep. There's a wider learning scheme going on, and the summative assessment has specific purposes, and they should be there to give definition to your learning objectives in a way that's easy to communicate to students, to teachers, to parents.
And especially when we're talking about defined age groups, like, for example, young learners, of course, we know parents are very important stakeholders, okay? So if we want to know that there's, you know what we sometimes say, Johnny, there was, about a certain lesson, there was definitely teaching, but was there learning?
Oof, and yes,
that's a key question, isn't it? So when we want to be able that we choose the best option for measuring progress, right? What can we take into account? We have different choices, right? And here, if people thought maybe we're going to say you have to either choose level by level or You do that
multi-level.
and then you say yes, or multi-level. And the wonderful thing, for example, with multi-level is
Oh,
that maybe you
we've
decide
lost
to
you,
use
Rosa.
it not.
Oh, I'm losing you. I can't. I'm hearing you and not hearing you. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe that's
You're
my
back.
mic.
You're
Okay,
back,
I'm
yeah.
back. Okay, so or maybe you can use a multi-level test twice, or you can use both. And that's a very interesting alternative that we're also going to ask our colleagues to consider, right?
Well, we have schools in Mexico that have started doing that, in fact.
Yep.
And it's also, we come onto this a bit later, but it's a great kind of, how can we put this? It's a great kind of feature or characteristic of a school. If everybody has taken an English exam, and historically from the Cambridge portfolio, if somebody's been maybe of an A1 level, then they've had to wait a couple of school years before they could take a key, because it was just deemed too difficult. Whereas we have certain schools slotting in MET Go and then progressing to maybe key or preliminary. They've configured it in a very interesting way that has proven quite successful.
And the very
most
easy thing for us to say, Johnny, is that whichever exam, whichever test is chosen by our colleagues here, by our preparation centers, all the schools that have trusted Cambridge and or Michigan, as far as their assessment of English is concerned, they know that there's quality, importantly, in the DNA of whatever exam or test they have chosen to use. Okay, so this is not about today I'm going to try and convince you to start or keep on using Cambridge exams, and Johnny's going to try you to go to Michigan. No. What really the message is, whatever your needs, whatever your context, there's a right exam, a right test for you. And this is what we would like you to invite you to explore.
And so we move on to motivation, and specifically looking here at young learners. So by young learners, we are referring to primary aged learners and students. And the motivation sounds odd when you're talking about like an end of year test or exam, but particularly the young learner exams, both the Cambridge and Michigan young learner exams, have been configured. And there is research behind it that shows that having those, the way that the results are given, it's very much a motivational process. It's very much a step-by-step process because they're just starting their English language learning journey.
Oh, yes, and we have exciting information about results, right? When we talk about specifically young learners, and as far as Cambridge and Michigan exams and tests are concerned regarding young learners. So that's going to be good because let's face it, we can sometimes have students who don't really understand why it is that they're learning English, right? And I've always said it makes me very sad as a Mexican that when you ask people in Mexico, as an ELT professional, as a Mexican ELT professional, that when you usually ask people, learners, students in Mexico, different levels, what are your favorite subjects? What are the most interesting things you do at school? They talk about social science, maybe sports, whatever. And you say, and which subjects don't you like? You know what the two things that most people say here in Mexico?
Let's see what the chat says. We've got some guesses coming in.
Maths, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And English.
Working, that is in general. It's English. The two, exactly. And I think this seems to be common. I wonder whether it's mainly Mexicans that are answering
or other countries,
this now.
maybe.
But in Argentina as well, they say English. Yes. Isn't that frustrating? I'm not going to say anything about mathematics because I have a brother who's a mathematician and he loves mathematics and I love him very much. So I don't want to start a fight here, a family fight. But I'm going to say when it comes to English, it really makes me sad, Johnny, because learning English, especially at a young age, can be and should be fun, should be motivating, right?
And especially at primary with young learners, they're at the stage where it is a process rather than a product. Unfortunately, it does come to be a product. Well, not unfortunately, it's just, again, context. But it does tend to become a product later on if it's for a university requirement or if it's for a job or visa applications. But from a young learner, it's all about process. And that's something motivation is certainly something to keep in mind. It sounds atypical of summative assessment, but I would definitely say when you're reviewing the exams that you wish to use for an end of year or end of kind of school exam, think about how it can motivate, not just judge and come back with a number.
Exactly,
speaking,
because what you do at a very early age, Johnny, can definitely have a great impact on your future life. And it has to do with whether you decide that you enjoy learning English or that you hate learning English, right? And also whether you decide tests are awful or that tests can actually be fun. Because I can tell you, I mean, I've been I'm not now, but I've been a speaking examiner for Cambridge exams, and I particularly enjoyed the young learners oral exams, right? Because they were such a great, and you could tell how the young learners were really excited that they could do what the exam was about. So that was an absolutely lovely experience.
And what do you think of when, or what do you think people tend to think of when we say feedback from summative assessment, Rosalia? I'm challenging you now.
Usually they expect to see a pass and fail, or fail rather, right? And just like that, and that's all they are going to get, right? But feedback can and should be much more than that. It's not just that you're getting worried, poor Kermit's here, right? Getting worried about whether you passed or failed the test, right? But it's, okay, so these happened, right? Let's not talk about specifically pass or fail. These happened. What can you do now?
And so certain exams and assessments, even summative ones, lend themselves quite nicely to giving feedback. By the way, everybody, this is my favorite picture from the whole presentation. I love it. They're just so cute. But anyway, what feedback can actually be, even from what we're calling summative exams, well, exams that are used for summative purposes. Really, they can give us feedback that's motivational. It's future focused, so helping feedback into the learning process. And as a result, it's highly effective. It's an effective means of propelling their English language acquisition and learning in class.
Exactly. Really good, successful feedback should help our learners see how they can go, how the future can be, what areas they can work on that they will see progress, usually quickly, or if they decide to spend a bit more time, etc., effectively, right? So this is why it's so important, and I think especially so when it comes to young learners. Feedback is very important for all sorts of different things, not just for learning English or for assessment, right? But especially when we're talking about young learners, we really understand that what we say, what we do. I remember when I was teaching some years ago, right? Like people said, I need to learn English because of my job, but I hate English because I had a horrible teacher when I was in primary school. And I said, that really is very sad, right? We have to think of the learners we have in class. Really, they are very important because we're working with human beings, Johnny.
Well, and tomorrow's, well, what is it? The future of tomorrow, right? And feedback is something that Cambridge and Michigan certainly take seriously, and it's something that we've seen through market and also kind of evidence-based research that people are really really keen on, and they feel like it's an essential thing now, and it's something that we're increasingly incorporating into our exams. One example of which is the feedback you get on something like the young learner exams in starters.
Yeah,
this has been a particularly, I mean, one of the few bright sparks of 2020, as far as I'm concerned. I was really pleased to see this.
One of the key things, and you can see, is the results, and they are in Spanish, because here for Latin America, the results are available in Spanish and in Brazilian Portuguese. This means that all the young learners English tests that started to take place on September the 1st, and there are some countries, in most countries it hasn't been possible to restart with young learners, but this means that if you are having a session as soon as it's possible to do so in your country, in your region, in your state, in your city, whatever, your young learners will get feedback like this, right? And this is, I said to Johnny, what I love about it is that there's a growth mindset. Okay, so this happened, but this is what can happen. This is what you can start focusing on, etc., etc. And as I said, it really is very effective. I think it's something that parents are going to love, because sometimes they say, I remember, I mean, going to certificates, award ceremonies, right? They say, would you please help me a little bit because my English is not that good, right? So we realize that, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Their kids are learning English, but let's make sure that their parents understand what it is that they have already achieved. And that is the great thing about the focus of this sort of feedback for our youngest candidates here.
And it's also a message loud and clear to everybody involved in the learning of English, whether that's from students to parents, teachers, directors, coordinators.
Exactly. And we're looking at monkeys here.
We are, but this is a stop in the way. It's a stop on the way of the journey. It's not the end of the journey itself, which is sometimes what people mistake a summative assessment for. And we've got monkeys. Yeah, quite right. The little Cambridge monkey there who's helping create that feedback.
But show me a different animal now, Johnny, please.
We've got the Michigan bear, because
wow, yeah.
Michigan young learners also have this feature. For those who are familiar with the exam. So again, it's something, like I say, as an educational organization, we've taken into consideration, and then being able to, it's been fantastic for us to be able to meet this particular demand that, as Dr. Leah said, has very practical implications. We know that parents have come a lot closer to the classroom in 2020, even if it's virtually, where they're kind of peering into classrooms and seeing what's going on. But that shows an enthusiasm and a keenness from their part. So why not add it to the assessment where they can engage, whether it's with very detailed, very kind of concise English, or in their own native language. And other languages are available. So we've said the LATAM languages that are available in other parts of the world. We also have different translations in all kinds of different languages.
And as you can see, the main objective here is that for our learners, for our very young learners, there will be less stress, because let's face it, if it's a test and there's stress, before the test, during the test, and then even after the test, right? I used to say, when I go to those ceremonies, I used to say, I like coming to ceremonies where people are getting certificates and diplomas, and they're very happy, because it seems to me that sometimes everybody is suffering before, right? When they're getting ready, when they're taking the test, after they have taken the test. And I say, and it's the learners, it's the teachers, it's the parents, it's the school authorities, etc. And for the parents, as I said, it's clear language, things that they can understand. And as we've said, the key thing here is that they will know what they can already do, what they have already achieved.
And we've had some comments of people saying, yes, but people just focus on the results. That's true, but it doesn't mean it doesn't mean exactly that you shouldn't engage with students, with teachers to really hammer home the importance. And even if you're not using, summative assessment, some of these ideas that you see can easily be applied, even if you're using an end of term test. It's all about thinking, what can I extract from this piece of assessment information? How can it facilitate further learning? So this isn't kind of just take an exam and get a grade. It's about changing the psychology of students and parents. So as Rosalia said, you're kind of instilling a growth mindset, which is not just applicable to exams, but to learning in itself. So lots of benefits to be drawn from this. Just a quick, I mean, this is a teenage exam for MET Go, so there's a bit more detail here. And this again is giving personalized feedback, so that students are able to see something about their English per skill, and also things that they can do afterwards to help them improve in particular areas. It gives very clear examples of activities that they can do. And interestingly enough, this is all in graded language. So we haven't got these translated at the moment, but it's in graded language. So the majority of components would be around an A1 level, stretching up to fewer components in A2, and some very few ones in B1. So again, the aim of this from our perspective was to help schools engage parents and students so that they're able to read that feedback. It's unique to each person's particular answer pattern. which again,
That's
I find
great.
fantastic. That you could have a class of 50 kids that have taken MET Go. They all get A2 on the listening, and their listening feedback is going to be different because it depends on how they've interacted with the test. Yes,
And that's why I have another question for you, Johnny. Are all students, are all learners the same?
They're certainly not. They are very different. So
exactly. So different important things that we have to keep in mind when we think about assessment, and if we are choosing making up our minds about a level-based exam or a multi-level test, right? What does your school need? What are the students who go to your particular school or university think that they're going to get because they went there because that was one of their important reasons, right?
yes, I mean, it's very, very important to keep that in mind.
Exactly. And then you look at your classes. I remember years ago, I had an intermediate once, which was like the first intermediate level class, right? And I happened to have 3 different groups, but exactly the same level. And I said, oh, life is going to be easy this term, right? After a week, they were all going in at different speeds. The level what they were getting, it was really different, etc. Because as we said, people are different, etc. Right? And we have to make sure that we understand what the strengths and weaknesses when it comes to a certain group of learners that are going to become candidates are, right? And what are we going to use the exam for, Johnny? Is it going to, if it's a summative test, so it's going to let us know whether that learner will pass that subject, whether there will be credit for that particular subject, that is in this case English, and what can we learn about how our students, our learners have been, what sort of information they've been getting, what problems, if any, they have had with English, what they can expect to have to work on maybe a little bit harder for the next course, etc.
So yeah, different speeds within the same class, within the same school, within the same network of schools, within the same city, countries. There are so many variations, so we need to consider that when we're selecting our summative assessment. And one of the chief considerations that people come up against, or one of those decision points, is this way or that way. What I like about this is it looks like a virtuous, it looks like they come around and make a heart shape, because they can both be wonderful and they can both be loving towards the learning process. And this is where we touch upon the scenario of blue sky thinking, but we have two real key options here, right? We've got the level-based and multi-level. And what we've been exploring up to now are some of the key concepts we need to consider, some of the things that are the same, or that should definitely be the same across the board, that obviously some of the examples we've discussed can definitely give you. But then also, what are the differences that we're looking for to be able to maximize that summative assessment interaction with our students?
And it has to be clear to us. That's why I say maybe our colleagues must have realized we've been using the word context quite frequently, because we said the education context has definitely been affected by what has been happening since March, right? So we're not going to talk about all the different education levels, but we're certainly going to mention some. And we're starting with young learners, Johnny, where we say, so if we decide to go level-based, right, that means that when parents decided to register their kids at our school, right, we told them, and by the time they finish, for example, in the case of primary school, 6th grade, they will have reached, and usually, for example, in Mexico, that is an A2 level, right? I know there are some primary schools, very good cases, where they even reach a B1 level, for example, right?
Which is quite an achievement. Yeah, I've seen that as well.
Totally, yes.
And so as we said earlier, there's research that Cambridge has conducted into the young learner exams, also the Michigan young learner exams, where that progression is really valuable to learners. And it's kind of supporting as well, because as you know, they're more like awards than exams in a sense, the young learner tests. And so they're able, in a very supported fashion, to get that journey started for learners. And we think it is motivational to get your medals or to get your, we've got medals, and what else have we got? Are they just medal and shields?
Stars.
With the
Yeah, we
stars.
have the shields. Yeah.
Shields, yeah. So to see that progression and the experience itself is motivational. So a school may decide to go for a level based in that sense, and as we said, it's a really clear promise to parents, and that's very reassuring from their end.
Exactly, and that it also shows, it proves, because it's an external exam provider, an
Yes.
assessment organization, that results are being achieved, right? They are getting there, really getting there.
Well, there's no room for bias, which is key, really, and we've seen that in action even at phrasal verb contests, haven't we, Rosalie, in the past? But it's good to have somebody external come in to judge, and in this case, it's the exam itself and
Totally
the examining body.
objective. Yeah.
Judge or give a kind of measure of progress, and to point them in a direction of travel where they can continue learning in a prospering way. If we take lower secondary as an example, Rosalie, what if we went multi-level?
Yes, because maybe the students that you're getting, all those learners that are starting first grade, secondary, lower secondary school, right? They don't all come from your own institutional primary school. So you're not really sure. I mean, they passed all the exams, everything, all the different subjects, but you're not really sure about their background. So a multi-level test may be in that way more appropriate, right? No learner left behind, because it's multi-level, you will know useful information about the different, all your different students and what they have achieved so far, right?
Yeah, and I like that idea of just inclusion. Yeah, not leaving anybody behind. Everybody has a pathway of effective and clear progression in their learning journey. Also, what we could say is you could even combine them, as we mentioned earlier, where some of them are taking a multi-level and some of them are taking a level-based, depending on which year of lower secondary they're in. So again, these are just hypothetical scenarios of what ifs. And we have a final one for you, which, throwing the mortarboards in the air.
Higher education, a university, right? So we say maybe you have an official entry requirement, and you say students who would like to study at these universities should have at least B1 level or a B2 level, etc., depending on your country, your institution, etc. And maybe you say, in order to graduate, you will need to have reached B2 or C1 by the time you finish your studies here, right?
Yeah, or maybe, and that's why we've put multi-level in this sense, there might be a spiky profile going on. So somebody might take a linguist skill or something, or an MET to get into university to show their English language credentials as an entry requirement. And they might say, wow, my listening and reading are much better than my speaking and writing. So really, over the next 3 years, before I retake this, not the same test, obviously, but retake another copy of that test, I'm going to have to really work on those areas. So it gives them that kind of, and again, that's feedback, and there's additional feedback led into that can help them progress in a way that's going to help them achieve their goals, which by definition is very motivational.
And I think I have to start tormenting you, because I'm being tormented as well.
I know, I am as well. We are getting there. So what we'd like to know in the chat before we show you what our key takeaways from planning this session were, we'd like to hear from you. So giving us at least 3 of your top considerations of what you are going to consider when looking or reviewing exams that you could use for a summative purpose.
Exactly. So just the words, just the notes you would say. We've mentioned some,
and
we will show you.
We're not accepting depends, are we?
No, we're not accepting it depends. We want
no depends
after. No. So just some words to see what you're saying, right? Background, definitely. Context, yes. And now that's such a huge consideration, right? Purpose, availability also, yes. What sort of learning has taken place before?
I like expectations as well. That's lovely.
Very good, right?
Reaching goals.
Standards. Yes.
Oh, snap.
Your goals. That's great. I think we've achieved our expectations here. We've exceeded actually
I think
our
we
expectations.
We're gonna show you what our top 5 were. We cheated and put 5 in. We said context.
I'm seeing too many bears here and not enough monkeys. Okay.
Well, There's a cute now.
There may be,
Flexibility.
there may be a bit bias.
Impact and feedback. Impact is maybe an area we could explore on in a later session, the impact, because we didn't really touch on that too much, but we felt it was still relevant enough to put into our top 5 considerations when we're looking at summative exams or exams used for summative purposes.
So these are not the only considerations to take into account, but these are 5 very important things that will be very important and will make a huge difference. Do we get to success, or is there stress for us and our learners and their parents in the case of young learners in the future?
And teen
right?
learners, yeah. But
So very important.
We hope we've given you we've given you enough ideas and key considerations so that this is a successful journey and not a stressful one for you and your learners.
Exactly,
And
because this is an invitation, as we said, to explore options, right? And as we have said before, it may be that you have been using a level-based exam, but after the last 5 months or so, when you're not sure about what your learners have been doing because you haven't really had formal teaching, etc. Technology is great if it's available for you and all your learners, etc. So it's an invitation to explore possibilities. And as we have said, it may be that you explore something for this particular year or for the next couple of years and see how they feel, because as we said, tests and exams shouldn't be, I'm not saying that we should make our learners love exams and tests, right? But I think they shouldn't be a stressful experience.
No, and as we said, the growth mindset, which is something that's in a kind of motif throughout the webinar, focusing on how that can help and enable learning instead of just being there as a one-off interaction.
Assessment for learning, not just thinking about assessment of learning.
And on that wonderful point, it's a great summary line. We've got the next destination, which is enjoying the journey, which is actually in 2 days' time. So if you haven't signed up, then we would encourage you to do so. We have been slapped on the wrists virtually because we've run over time, Rosalia. So we've got, I think, 6 minutes for questions. So if the host with the most, Raphael, would like to come back on and fire away, then we would be delighted to do what we can in the remaining 360 seconds.
Rosalia and Johnny, thank you very much. So we have received many questions and many interesting questions from our participants, and we will now direct them to you. Apologies if I mispronounce or don't get your name right. So we have, our first question is from Sixto Veiga. Based on your experience, how can I motivate students who only study English because the university tells them to? The students only need to learn English because they have to register for the next semester. So you touched the higher education in one of the slides. So
I'd like to answer that, if I may. If they're university students, I think one of the most important questions to ask is, how do you see your future? What do you see yourself doing in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, etc.? What would you like to accomplish? What would you like to do? Right? When I talk about exams and I talk to candidates and their parents, I say, for me, these certificates, these diplomas that you're getting, they're not really just pieces of paper, right, with the name Michigan or Cambridge on them. They're really keys to open very important doors. Which doors do you want to open? You want to travel? Chances are, depending on where you go, English will help you, right? You want to work? Where do you want to work? What sort of industry? Chances are, because English has become today's lingua franca, English will help you get there. Do you want to keep on studying? Well, are you looking for a scholarship? Where do you want to go? Do you want to go to someplace like the UK or Australia or Canada or the US? And even because of internationalization and all these wonderful different approaches that we're having in education at the higher level, right? There's lots of opportunities. So think of the exams will give you certificates or diplomas that actually are very important keys for really important doors.
I would add something very briefly, and that's a slightly different angle to Rosalia's, which is a great angle to play on, definitely with students for motivating them. but I would say that you've got to look at the impact that exam is having. Maybe your learning goals and learning content is too focused towards the exam perhaps, and maybe you can achieve the same goals and prepare them in the same way for the particular exam by engaging more with activities and content that they like. So Rosalia focused on the professional aspect, which is 100% correct, but there's also the personal aspect. I bet you they watch Netflix and other streaming services in English. I bet you they love series in English. I bet they love music in English. I bet they even follow influencers in English. Some of them might even read in English. So how about a survey where you find out what they already do or engage with in terms of the English language and harness that?
Gamers, Johnny.
Yep.
It's been proved, and I can tell you that I have seen it in my family. Young people who are interested in video games, they know that they can have access to more interesting players, groups, etc., if they can communicate in English, and that's fantastic.
Great, thank you. Another interesting question from Connie writes, I would be delighted, since we are talking about the same topic, I would be delighted to know a few strategies to motivate and provide feedback to students based on your presentation.
The feedback, well, we've already mentioned a little bit about that. I think what we said, for example, in the examples we gave you, we gave them, Johnny, with the young learners test, both from Cambridge and Michigan, is there is a clear focus on the can-do statements. What the learners have proved that they can do. Right? Not that you didn't get this right, you didn't get this right either, right? Cross. No. It's everything that you have proved that you can do, that you've already achieved. I think that really is important. It's like some people say, for example, when you mark an exam, you should never use a red ink, for example, because that really is negative.
Yeah, well, to pick up on that point, make it about a positive learning process rather than a judgment that's fallen on top of them like a heavy load of bricks. I mean, really, again, it depends on lots of the things we spoke about today. So I'm going to say that because if it's young learners, it's different to teenage learners, it's different to older teens, it's different to adults. But the general message should be to try to use and harness and draw the lines as closely as you can. That's easier conceptually with older learners than it is primary. But to show them that you're reacting to the feedback they've got and you're changing things in the class to help them. Everybody, even from a young age, you're the center of your own world. They say that teenagers are most like that from studies, but I beg to differ. I think everybody is. Everybody's interested if it's about them. And if you if you're able to show them that, look, you struggled in this type of listening activity, so we're going to change this, and we're doing this. We weren't going to do this until we saw your results, but now we're going to do it because I want to help you. That's a very powerful message from a teacher.
Exactly. And may I just add, for example, when it comes to very young learners, and we told you, for example, for the young learners test, be they monkeys or bears, right? Parents will be able to understand and they will be able to share the success of their kids. Isn't that wonderful? So there will be even more reasons to be happy about, because our very young candidates, their parents will be able to understand what they can do now, what they have achieved, right? That's great. As a parent, I swear to you, that really is great.
Great. Thank you very much for your answer. Lots of interesting questions, really. I would like to read them all, but we will have some opportunities to engage with these questions. So the next question is, how can actually I engage, from Carlos Cooley Pariachi, how can I engage more with exams? I think this is a very important question, maybe to wrap up and get some interesting ideas.
How you can engage more with exams? You mean as an educator?
Yes.
Have you taken any of our exams yourself? I think that would be my very first question, because if you haven't and you're teaching English and you're maybe preparing learners to take the test, it would be good for you to go through the experience.
And also maybe even workshops with colleagues to say, we're doing the preliminary or first, or we're doing MET. Let's sit down and look at the exam, each of the 4 abilities, let's take a look at, or the 4 skills, sorry. Let's look at what they're asking and how this relates to our learning objectives. So coming around to the first point we made about assessment in a summative context, having a specific connection with your learning objectives, or at least trying to bridge that. But I agree with Rosalia, definitely take a look at the exams yourself, especially if you're teaching students that will end up taking an exam, even if it's not in your year, even if it's a year or two after your particular year group. Definitely it's worth reviewing them, but also interrogating them, picking them apart and saying, why are they asking this? What are they expecting? And on our websites, for example, the Michigan and Cambridge websites, you can see examples of speaking performance, of writing performance, with judgment criteria to say how well they've done, why they've done well, what they can improve on. Again, that's all part of the feedback mechanism outside of the exam that you can engage with.
And I know we have to go, but just to add there, Johnny, is that have a look at things like Quiz Your English, Speak and Improve, or Write and Improve, because those are really very nice, interesting ways, fun, which is very important, of interacting with some sort of very gentle testing, very gentle assessment that, as I said, it's actually also fun and can help you. And I'm not just talking about our learners. I'm also talking about ourselves as educators, okay? Have a look at those. If you haven't, go visit our websites and you will see what I mean, okay?
Thank you. Dear all, unfortunately, our time is up and we have answered as many questions as we could. Before we say goodbye, I would like to thank our speakers, Rosalia and Johnny, and to remind you of the upcoming session on Thursday, okay, this Thursday, which will be about enjoying your journey. Thank you all for being with us today. If you wish to contact us, please access our websites that you can see from the screen. A big thank you also to all our colleagues working in the backstage to make this event possible. So see you in our next session. Thank you very much.
Keep safe.
See you on Thursday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.